Welcome to this event organized by the Society for Research into Higher Education. I'm thrilled to see such a large and international crowd, and I look forward to what we have in store for you for the next couple of hours. My name is Bhatt, and I've organized this event alongside my colleague Sal Consoli at Edinburgh University, Dylan Williams at Queen Mary University, and also Li Jian at the Education University of Hong Kong. Our goal is to help establish a new network within the society called the Multilingual University Network. This event marks the beginning of that process, so we hope to share more with you about the network as we go in coming weeks and months. So you could consider this event as a kind of launch or a pilot for that network. I will very briefly introduce the context and the speakers, and then I will hand over to them. So I promise not to speak for very long. So onto the actual content. Well, I think most of us are aware that globalization has propelled English to the status of a kind of academic lingua franca. But the imposition or an uncritical adoption of a particular language in higher education is not neutral. It's far from neutral. It's profoundly political. And it's a cultural and epistemic dilemma for teachers, students, researchers, administrators, and managers alike. The issue brings to the fore what we have termed in this event's title as higher education's language problem, a topic that we explored in a special issue for the journal Teaching and Higher Education, which I co-edited some 2 years ago. The event is designed to unpack some of the ideas and some of the challenges and tensions in the in the contemporary university with respect to the language problem. So our speakers hail from three very different parts of the world and represent three very different higher educational contexts. And so we've decided to organize, each of the speakers will present a provocation related to higher education's language problem. And we decided to organize the event in this way because we felt that leading with provocations would lead to a richer and more topical discussion with such an international and diverse audience as yourselves. Importantly, the conversations are also interdisciplinary. Not everybody here is a linguist, and that's important. And we feel that we must find more inclusive settings beyond niche venues like language research groups, where there is some very interesting things going on. But sometimes the implications of that research don't feed into a broader field of higher education. So we felt that the Society for Research into Higher Education serves as an ideal platform for this kind of thing. So our speakers are, first and foremost, Professor Yang Rui from Hong Kong University, who will talk on constructing a bi- or multicultural intellectual mind. Professor Yang is the Dean and Chair of Education at the University of Hong Kong. And we are very grateful that he's taken the time out of his very busy schedule to lead this event today for us. Following this is Professor Othman Barnawi, whose provocation concerns Islam-language-transnationalism in higher education. Professor Barnawi is professor at the Royal Commission for Yambu Colleges and Institutes, Saudi Arabia. And finally, Dr. Iker Erdothia will talk on how does mastery of the English language dictate career progression in Irish universities. Iker is the Director of Research at the School of Applied Language and Intercultural Studies at Dublin University, which is in Ireland. So each of them will present their provocation, which I have been told will be provocative, for about 15 minutes. And this will be followed by a 5-minute break just before the hour, which will be 11 a.m. for us in the UK. We will then be joined by our discussants, Dylan Williams, Li Jian, and Sal, who will then provide some kind of elaboration, commentary, and questions regarding the three provocations. At that point, the three presenters can counter any of the points raised or just clarify or elaborate. And then we hope to segue into a kind of open general question and answers with everybody, though you're free to write things down in the chat as we go. And I will try my best, and so will the co-organizers, to pick up some of your questions as we go. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat as well, and to introduce yourself before you ask a question, if you choose to do so. So now I hope that's clear. Now I'd like to call upon our first presenter, Professor Yang Rui from the University of Hong Kong. Sir, could you share your screen, and you may begin at any time.
Sorry, is it okay? Good, okay. Let me get started. First and foremost, I want to express my heartfelt appreciation and thanks to the organizers of this event. I think this is a fascinating event, especially to Bhatt for your invitation. I'm truly honored to be here today. As you can see in my title, higher education and language, but I will not talk too much about language. I think I will focus on higher education in East Asia. That's what I'm relatively feel more comfortable. I try to bring this to this event. Now, higher education, especially in East Asia, I hope this is what I say about higher education in East Asia is new to you. I think what I say here can be a certain kind of nice compliment to other colleagues' talks. Higher education development in the vast non-Western world is intricately, I think, linked to language issues. Even I'm not going to focus on language. I'm not a language expert, but especially the global scale of the English language. I think the global status of English is a complex and complicated issue. It has huge implications for development in non-Western countries, particularly, but in many aspects, in the social, in the cultural, in the scholarly development, very influential, profound influence. So let me focus on higher education, and I use this title, a spectre haunting East Asia. Largely, actually, let me get rid of this. Largely, actually, not only East Asia, the spectre is haunting almost the whole non-Western world, particularly. But I need to explain. I spent much time preparing my slide, but I will not read my slides. My slides are for you to read. So I'm not going to talk to read my slides. But since the 15th century, I think the whole world, before that, the West, largely the West, I don't have time to define this very accurately. The West learned from many parts of the world. Since 1500, according to historians, they use for convenience, they use this year. Since then, the world has been dominated by the West, the so-called West. So the West has been profoundly influenced the whole world. And this is especially in East Asia. This is especially in East Asia. I don't know whether you can see my slide. Let me get rid, how to get rid of this. Okay. I don't know whether this affects my talk. I don't know. What do you think from the screen? Anyway, let me quickly explain. When we look at development, many countries, the earlier industrialized countries, that's Western countries. In fact, we observe very few countries, almost none, rich countries are non-Western. And very few Western countries are poor. And this is not accidental, I think. East Asia is another region. Some people argue it's the only region, in addition to the West, becoming developed, really developed. But the development in East Asia is basically modeled almost exclusively on the Western experience. If you look at the institutionalized the institutions in East Asia, it's 100% based on Western. Traditions are there, but traditions are functioning in a secret way, tacit way. And this creates huge problems. I'm going to illustrate more later. East Asian countries also have very different trajectory in terms of their how they embrace the West. Japan, if you're from outside, you may not realize that so clearly. But if you are from inside, and I notice many audience, they have East Asian names. And if you are from East Asia, you will know China's approach to modernization has been very different from Japan. And Korean is also different. So these societies have different trajectories and quite different with very, very different results also. But they are all very devoted students of the West. Okay, they learn the West very, very devotedly. And that's part of the achievement, but that's also part of the fundamental problem. And the integration I have in my slide is a huge word. It's never really achieved, although it's always desired. It's always desired, as I mentioned. And this is a Chinese university mission. It's actually created before formally establishment of Chinese University of Hong Kong. It was one of the colleges called New Asia. And this was developed by the founder of New Asia College, which later became part of Chinese University of Hong Kong. And you see, this has been beautifully put here. But in terms, sorry, I'm a little bit critical. In terms of achievement, I don't think Chinese University of Hong Kong has achieved so much during the past decades, many years. Chinese University was established in the late 50s, early 1960s, 1962, I think. So all these major institutions and largely these societies are still struggling with this, with great difficulties. Let me just quickly explain a little bit. This is a very complicated issue. Japan's, so far, the approach has been what I call juxtaposition, to put the Japanese, the traditional Japanese, including the Confucian, borrowed from from Chinese culture, but also the Japanese, traditional Japanese, indigenous Japanese, to put these together with the West, but in juxtaposition, almost little integration. Okay, China from the very beginning tried to achieve this, to combine tradition with modernity. In China, scholarly literature, tradition of something they call new and old. Old means traditional, old means Chinese, new means modern, new means Western. And they always want to put together the new and the old together, and they have never achieved really, and they have been suffering so much. And their progress in terms of their industrialization progress was very much hindered by this difficulty. While Japan, relatively more successful because they tried to keep two without integration, because the integration has been very, very difficult. And not only difficult for East Asia, of course, also difficult for African countries and other non-Western societies. Therefore, East Asia, sorry, I can't hardly recognize my own writing. This is not only an East Asian issue, it's actually largely non-Western. All non-Western societies face this issue. And East Asia has, if you look at our system, we have two systems. People usually only look at the formal system, the institutionalized system. The institutionalized system is actually Western. Even China, often treated as a kind of opposite to the West. Actually, China's institutionalized systems are used plural form. Legal system, education system, even cultural system. A lot of systems, they are based on Western experience. Chinese People's Congress is just parliament, democracy based on that kind of idea. The issue is you have the formal part, but whether or not the formal part, the formal system can function properly, can work very effectively. That's the issue, because the traditional, the informal part, very powerful, but function often in the dark. Let me move on. Therefore, I said the formal system actually is not very effective if you look at our higher education system. not as effective as those university or systems in the West, in culturally, intellectually, and also politically. So largely in non-Western, but particularly in East Asia. And I realize there are some Chinese students there in the audience. I deliberately put some Chinese there. So there's a huge division, separation among individuals and also within the society, within the system. When people conduct themselves, we say 做人, conduct themselves, when people are doing business, okay, in workplace, particularly formally, workplace, being professional, there's a huge separation there, tensions actually. Modern Chinese people only are very Chinese when they are emotional. When they are rational, they are non-Chinese. They are very often very much Western. So this kind of division is widely seen, I think, in Korea, in Japan, also in Vietnam, but I'm very familiar in the Chinese societies. I use plural form, including Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and the mainland. I also want to emphasize the fact that very few countries, arguably no country, can really success, achieve highly in terms of managing modernity and tradition. Modernity is mainly Western. Tradition is very much their own, different cultures, traditions. Very few countries, almost none, really successful in terms of this. And the fact, we can't say, non-Western people are not smart enough. I think this one major reason is Western culture. In terms of higher education, for example, the Western model does not tolerate other alternatives. I think that's one of the major reasons. And that's something we need to pay very much attention to. To put a political correctness aside, we have to realize this. In terms of learning, I quote President George Bush here because I realize, sadly, well, this is my personal view. You may not agree with me. In terms of learning from others, which is, I think, a fundamental condition for today's society to become sustainable. But in terms of this, the West is not doing well enough. I quote this. I don't think much progress has been made in terms of this. So what do we learn in classroom, at least in East Asia, at least in China, in Chinese societies I'm familiar with? What do we learn in classroom cannot be easily applied in real life and work. We still see those in textbooks as right. We see our textbooks are based on entirely Western experience. We still see those content as right, true, and even moral, but they cannot be applied very well in our real life. John Dewey famously say, education is experience. But in our education here in Hong Kong and in the mainland, Chinese mainland, education is not our people's experience, life experience or social experience. Education is American people's life experience. Education is European people's life and experience. I don't want to emphasize the division, okay? I just want to look at this academically, but that's the fact, and that's a very inconvenient fact. Yeah. For non-Western societies, if you look at higher education, I want to emphasize modernization means very differently to us. Development means we respond to the West. Development means, for us, means we respond strategically, appropriately, depending on how you define this, to the West. So if you look at higher education development, conceptualization, for example, that's my work. Almost entirely our theory, we make sense based on the higher education theories in the West. Indeed, I need to say higher education theories, mainly Western, or exclusively Western. They are not at all very sophisticated, actually fairly simple. East Asia, because of that kind of conceptualization, therefore, we as East Asian higher education researchers in our own region, we cannot see our real problems. We cannot see our real progress or achievement either. Our research, although our modernization, higher education is a part of a wider learning from the West, part of the wider modernization, but it's a kind of historical continuity. But if you look at our literature, almost all of them, no connection, no linkage with history. And therefore, because of this, they can hardly guide our practice. There are also a kind of other people, small. Well, what I just mentioned, the situation, you can argue that they are the mainstream here in our societies. But there are some people, a few, not many, emphasize the traditional part. But I think there is also a kind of tendency, wrong tendency in my eyes, or fallacy, because they tend to overemphasize the tradition. It's almost like the tradition in vacuum, okay, without fully or properly realize the Western, the Western knowledge. Western knowledge has already become the mainstream or the most important part of our modern knowledge. And if you don't look at this condition, then you get very wrong conclusion. I don't know how I manage the time, but it's quite difficult to talk within 15 minutes.
Would you like to?
No, I'm okay. I'm okay. Don't worry. I just feel I jumped too much, whether the audience can follow me. My finding as a higher education researcher, I focus on higher education development in East Asia. My own finding in recent years is, however, there is some signs of hope. And one of those major findings, I think, is a growing multicultural intellectual mind and in East Asian universities. Let me put this simply. If you travel to National University of Singapore or Chinese University of Hong Kong, or University of Hong Kong, my own institution, or Fudan University in Shanghai, Peking University in Beijing, or National Taiwan University, you can easily talk to all ranks, academics, full professors and assistant professors. Generally, they have wonderful knowledge of what's going on in the so-called West. Okay, they know very much in detail. They actually, arguably, they know as well as assistant professors in Stanford University about what's going on, the development in the world, mainly in the Western world. But they are different from their peers in the UK, in America. These people also know their own region. They not only have the knowledge of their own region, they also have their passion, their love for their own places. And they are trying to have a nice combination, to have knowledge of both rather than one. So I call this, if you look at multiculturalism, actually Australia is claimed to be a multicultural society, Canada too, America. But I actually think, well, let me go even further. If you look at speeches delivered by university president, you will find Chinese university president, within their talk, always they have the past, the modern, the present, the Western, the Chinese. They have this. If you look at American president talk, they only have themselves, okay, their own culture, I mean. So in terms of this, actually many American major universities are much less multicultural than universities or academics in East Asia. So I personally think this is a huge development. That's what I have found, and I feel excited about this. I think this is also hugely promising because, as I just mentioned, learning of knowledge of other societies and by extension, respect for other societies is a fundamental condition for sustainable development. For non-Western, of course, but in the long run, also for Western institutions and societies. So I think this is a major development. And this really distinguishes East Asian academics and their institutions, their systems from their peers in the West. So I personally pay much attention to this, and I think highly of this. I also place a lot of hope on this.
Thank you, Professor.
Time's up?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
You can just wrap it up right at the last point if you like.
Well, I just want to say this has huge implications,
right,
because very few countries can really manage tradition and modernity, and East Asian experience needs, to be seriously treated, analyzed, and learned. Of course, both our failures, of course, and our success. Thank you. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. We will be revisiting these issues later in the next part. It's just that I know that Othman Barnawi is in a bit of a rush. That's why.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and please feel free to put your comments in the chat, and we can pick them up later on. Professor Barnawi, would you like to share your screen?
Oh, okay. All right. Can you all guys see my screen here?
Yes, thank you. Yes, we can.
All right, guys. Thank you very much once again for inviting me, Dr. Abrar, and also thank you very much, everybody, for attending my sessions. I apologize in advance because I have to rush, and it's a Friday here, and I have to rush to the mosque and cut the prayer. So I would spend less than like more than 15 minutes. Sorry. In my today's session, actually, I would like to problematize the idea of Islam, language, and transnationalism in higher education rather than really providing an answer or making a case. To begin with, actually, transnationalism generally refers to multiple ties, interaction, activity that connect people, institutions, cultural practices across different borders of nation state. This is a general understanding and conceptualization of transnationalism in the contemporary higher education. Interestingly, there is a rich body of research has been emerged over the past 3 decades that use transnationalism as an analytical lens, to examine different issues of higher education, including, for example, like history, language, identity, etc., etc. What is interesting here is that because the idea or the project of transnationalism was historically developed in the United States, like the earlier conceptualization of transnationalization or transnationalism was very much US oriented. However, in our contemporary higher education context, scholars from Asia, from Europe, from Africa, from even the Arabian Gulf region, where I'm very much familiar with in terms of the operation, orientation, and process of higher education. So scholars have used different epistemology theories and research practices to examine the phenomena of transnationalism in higher educations. Particularly in the Arabian Gulf regions, higher education bodies have now been experiencing aggressive form of transnationalizations, with, of course, generous logistic, academics, and also administrative support from our governments here in the GCC countries. And while all this happening, English continue to be the working language of transnationalizations of higher education. So therefore, the dominant conceptualizations of higher educations here in the Arabian Gulf continue to be like the Western way and Western forms of transnationalizations of higher education, which is very much problematic. And at the same time, I notice also that language teacher education in relation to transnationalization or transnationalism remain underexplored at both epistemological, theoretical, historical, and practical levels. Therefore, I thought it's important to examine this symbiotic relationship between language teacher education and transnationalism, an area that has been widely neglected and the dominant, actually, scholarship of transnationalism and transnationalization of higher education. When I say language teacher education and transnationalism, actually, these two concepts are understood as activities in the grounds in which English language students and different actors, actually, they are engaged in a regular, sustained transnational relation and practices. More specifically, the idea of transnationalism in language teacher education usually take places in different forms, like, for example, study abroad programs, online teacher education, professional development, and PhD programs. You would often find different aspects and dimensions of transnationalism and transnationalizations of higher education phenomena is going on. In order to explore more about the way in which transnationalism in language teacher education occur, manifest, how it has been taken, contested, negotiated, and even protected from being challenged, a friend of mine and I put together an edited volumes called Teacher Education and Transnational World. Based on this volume, what we found is that contributors have offered sort of a multiple layer of intervention centers on mobility of knowledge, ideas, pedagogies, etc. At the same time, they have also used a diverse set of historical theoretical perspective alongside different methodological orientations and research questions to examine how transnationalism and language teacher education manifest within their own context, right? But interestingly, what I found it quite amazing is that within all these discussions, they still couldn't sort of challenge the Western foundation of language teacher education, unfortunately, within higher education context, right? Simply because their foundational understanding of language teacher education is still like based on Western tradition of thought, right? Taking into account the ascendancy, right, of the Anglosphere of Western epistemology and language in the field of language teacher education, they still found it quite difficult. So the idea of epistemological delinking become a big problem in the language teacher education when it's come to when it's come to examining the language teacher education related to transnationalism. I thought one way of really thinking about how to really de-link and challenge this issue is that to look at it from what I call Islam language transnationalisms, right? How we can examine transnationalism in language teacher education through Islam language transnationalisms in order to theorize our own experiences, because oftentimes in higher education environment and even in language teacher education specifically, when we come to talk about our own problems, our local problems, right, we tend to use and borrow thinking tools and also research practices that are often we acquired and that often we learn from a Western context, right, to explore our own problem. We really theorize our own problems. This is the major issue that I found in the context of language teacher education. So I thought maybe looking at it from Islam language transnationalism may give us some possibilities, some spaces to find ways in which we can sort of challenge and disrupt the dominance of language teacher education in the context of transnationalism. It's understandable that transnationalism in the context of religious fluidity of religions, be it Christianity or even Islam across borders, and also religious has long been transnational, right? And because it's obviously been operating beyond its native shore, right? If we look at it specifically, the historical and ideological interconnection between Islam, Arabic, and transnationalism we can see that they manifest in different ways and different levels, like through intellectuals and scholarly exchange, through trades, literary works, through groups of Muslims, like moving from different countries, from students, also moving from different Muslim countries to gain and construct knowledge in different ways, right? Why so? Simply because in Islam, and Islam always encourage like four types of journey when it's come to searching knowledge, right? These four types of journey actually called, the first one is called Hajj or pilgrims. The second one is called Hijrah, when Muslim people, they move to another countries for religious, economic purposes, or ziyarah when they visit sacred places. The last one is that when they travel for learning or educational travel, it's also called rihla. So the concept of Islam language and transnationalism here is conceptualized and understood as transnationalization of Muslim and Muslim ideas and thinking toward, of course, with Arabic as a second language through activities, connections, intellectual exchange, interactions, etc., etc. Right. With that being said, what I'm really interested in understanding is that how the concept of Islam language transnationalism may provide possibilities for challenging language teacher education policy and higher education, research, curricula, and classroom pedagogical practice. In the current scholarship of transnationalization of higher education, a lot of scholars have talked about the phenomena of inter-Asian students' mobility and even inter-African students' mobility. By inter-Asian students' mobility, I'm here referring to the flow of Asian students, within Asian countries to pursue different degrees. For example, you will often find like a Chinese student studying in Hong Kong or Chinese students studying in Malaysia. Of course, all these practices are taking place in English, right? Interestingly, even though they are all Asians, right? But there's another phenomena of intra-Asian students' mobility and intra-African students' mobility taking place in Arabic, which has been widely neglected, even in the Asian context as well as African context. For example, we'll find a large number of Asian students, be they Chinese, uh, Indians, Singaporeans, Malaysians, for instance, they are moving constantly to countries such as other Asian countries like Saudi Arabia, for example, in order to pursue their degrees in Arabic language, right? And at the same time, we'll find a large number of African students moving to other African countries like Sudan, Egypt, Morocco to pursue their degree in Arabic language, right? While these happenings, of course, there is a strong flow of different epistemology, theory, ideologies, ideas, classroom pedagogical practices, right, going on and being exchanged by different group of Asians and African students. But yet, how can we deploy these different forms of epistemologies, theories, classroom pedagogical practices to disrupt the dominance of Anglo-Saphir epistemology and language, specifically in the context of language teacher education? I think if we are really committed to transnationalism in language teacher educations, we have to really look at such kind of issue in order to deeply and critically reflect on the phenomena of transnationalism in language teacher education. Unless otherwise, like we'll end up using the same Western tradition of thought, the same thinking tool, the same imaginations, and the dominant discourse, and even understanding and unpacking transnationalism in language teacher education using the foundational knowledge of Western that have long shaped our understandings. At this stage, I would like to stop and say thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Baranawi. Almost like a perfect uh, complementation to Professor Yang's provocation. I've written plenty of notes, and I have some questions of my own to ask, which relates to both of these. Thank you very much. And so we will move swiftly now on to Dr. Iker Erdothia. If you could share your screen and tell us what's happening in Ireland.
Hi everyone, good morning from Ireland. Okay. So that's my PowerPoint, which I think you can see. Yeah. Okay. I'm almost ready. Just a second. Okay. Yes, I'm ready. Yeah. So hi everyone again. I'm delighted and honored actually to be here and be able to share my thoughts and my provocation with you all. The title of my provocation, I think, reflects quite well what I'm going to speak about. But I'm going to go a bit beyond actually, because I would like to do my provocation even more provocative, if that's if it can be done. And actually, I would like to overall address the aim of this event, which is to create a new network in relation to higher education and multilingualism, and hopefully to generate a bit of debate among participants as well. Okay. All right. Okay. So I think you see, yeah, sorry, just a second. Yeah, that's better. Okay, so as you can see there on the slide, my provocation takes the form of an open question, which is what can we do when language is often not recognized as a problem by universities, thus rendering the language problem non-existent. I think this is provocative enough. This is a very important question for me because it's the foundation of my talk, as I said, but also it's a big part of my own research and a question that I often ask myself, especially as a language policy scholar, which is what I've been doing in the last years and what I consider that I am actually a language policy scholar among many other things, of course. The organizers of this event asked me to draw on empirical evidences to prepare my provocation, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to draw, as you can see there down on a recent article written with my colleague and friend Josep Soler, in this case, who is based in the University of Stockholm. I'm going to speak and present some data as well about unpublished material. And I want to say that the aim of this piece of research was to explore how having English as an additional language, I know that this could be a problematic term anyway, but well, having English as an additional language shapes the career progression of multilingual scholars in Irish universities. This was a qualitative research based on interviews with multilingual academics from different parts of the world with English as an additional language and from different disciplines and areas. Most of them were from humanities and social sciences, but also from other areas of knowledge. and well, they were from different, or they were in different stages in their academic career as well. So we had assistant professor, associate professor, and professors and full professors as well. Apart from that, we also included senior management members, and we also did an analysis of language, of no language, but university policy documents. As you can see there, well, I'm going to present two illustrations or examples in which I'm going to, show and draw in order to make my points and finally address the question, the provocation question. Very quickly, I'll say something about the background. I guess most of you perhaps are familiar with the country in which I'm based on, which is Ireland. In this case, well, it's officially bilingual country, but in practice, actually, English is the dominant and hegemonic language in most sectors in society. This includes, of course, also higher education, universities, and the educational system in general, where unfortunately Irish has a very small place other than in signals, for example. With this, I'm referring to universities, not so much to primary or secondary education. It's true that Irish universities have undergone a big change in the last decade. they are now much more diverse than what they used to be in terms of students and staff. I can give you a figure, which is a kind of estimation, and around 15, 20, or 25% of current staff members in universities are from a country other than Ireland, and most of them from a non-speaking or non-English speaking countries. So there's been some improvements in terms of language diversity and appreciation of linguistic diversity as well. For example, in my university now, most students can take a course in a foreign language, and staff as well in a foreign language and in Irish. So there is a kind of change, a bit, a good change, let's say, a development in terms of the appreciation of linguistic and cultural diversity. But as I'm going to talk about, there is a lot to do about that as well. So the research context I'm going to focus on is based on 3 universities based in Dublin, which are Dublin City University, my own university, Trinity College Dublin, and University College Dublin as well. Theoretical underpinnings, I won't say about that because this is going to be more a provocation, obviously, but I'm going to draw on a relational approach to the different forms of capital, drawing on Bourdieu. And for the second illustration, I'm going to draw on Sarah Ahmed's concept of non-performativity, which is the institutional speech acts that don't bring into effect what they name. So in this particular context, I refer, and this is one of the points of my talk, I refer to the policies that don't bring into effect what they are supposed to do, because in this particular case, they dismiss, ignore, or make invisible what I call the language issue or language problem, as for the event's title. This is the first illustration. There are 2. So this extract is from one senior management member of one university, representing the position of the university, basically saying that language doesn't seem to be a big issue for the professional advancement of academics with English as an additional language, which according to our findings is partly true, but only partly true. As you can see there, she says, for example, I don't think that language-related issues really come to the fore, I'm reading now from the excerpt, when staff are being considered for progress or say for promotion, because they are hired actually for the knowledge expertise, for the research expertise. So they are supposed to have a good command of English, and actually that doesn't seem to play a big role when they want to get promoted to associate or to full professors, for example. However, our findings do reveal some issues with some specific academics, which they share with us that they have issues. Actually, most of them are saying that their main difficulty is academic writing for publication purposes, which is not surprising, let's say. There is some research on that. But some others also mention, for example, participation in committees or boards, even to be accepted to join one committee, for example, has a language issue there as well. And they also mentioned, for example, anxiety, which is an issue that we don't talk about a lot, I would say. Of course, this affects more, people who didn't take their education in English. So there is a big difference, and I'm going to speak about that in a minute. Apart from that, let's say, linguistic competence difficulties, there are a number of language-based microaggressions, and I'm going to show you one, and I'm going to focus on that one in illustration number 2. So the analysis of the university policies show that actually language is pretty much absent. And this is why my claim about the invisibility of language that we're going to see now as well. However, and this is important because it's a part of my publication, actually in our research, the academics were such a big heterogeneous group of scholars, so it's difficult to make claims and to generalize. And that's one of the reasons why, this term of English as an additional language is also problematic, actually, because we go some academics saying that, well, my English is excellent, I've never had any problem, and actually when I write in English, my English is even better than that of Irish colleagues, so obviously it's difficult to generalize in this context. Apart from that, yeah, well, this is important as well because the linguistic capital of these academics with English as an additional language actually it was a capital and it was an affordance compared to other peers with English as an additional language in non-English speaking universities and countries. So it's not, I mean, the conclusion of this is that they could benefit as well from the fact that they were based on an English-speaking university compared to, let's say, other countries. So, well, with this, I want to say that there are, in this research paper, we presented an additional critique as well to this native versus non-native binary, which is, you can see it everywhere, still everywhere, even though we've criticized it quite a lot. In any case, I think find this contrast with the extract by the senior management member that I referred to at the beginning. So I'll go very quickly to illustration 2, which has 2 movements, so 2 parts. The first one illustrates quite well, I think, the nature of a language-related microaggression in a university. So because the excerpt is a bit long, I'm going to leave you like perhaps 30 or 40 seconds to read it, and I'm going to just add a few comments after that. So if that's okay for you, let's read it in 30 seconds, let's say. Okay, so here we have many things. Actually, one of them is the focus on a deficit notion of the speaker, and also much on the responsibility of the listening subject in communication in a multilingual university. Apart from that, we have the symbolic role of the speaker as well, which was, well, supposedly involved in matters of integration within the university. And here I can say that both, colleagues were female. And well, this continues because it's a part of an episode which is quite interesting, and the second interesting thing comes later when the person who felt actually hurt by this microaggression threatened the other person to go to and to report in HR. And actually here we have her reflections saying that, well, finally I didn't go actually because I realized how low were my chances of actually being able of winning the argument if I went through the institutional policy or the institutional way. So they would have probably said that this non-native speaker has worded the email in our own way, and our Irish colleague just didn't understand it. So here we see many things. Again, we have this linguistic deficiency framing, first of all. We also have the Irish way, which is a stereotypical way of referring to procedures in Ireland, like saying like everything is grand, but I won't go into that. I think the most important consequence of this is that language is not considered officially and institutionally as a potential factor of discrimination, inequality, and unfair treatment by institutional mechanics. Then there are no complaints issued, even if such discriminatory episodes do occur and actually happen. it follows that the language problem doesn't get recognized by universities. We cannot know if this is just something, or if this is just an anecdotal case, or is something more structural. So I'm aware of my time. I'm going to finish in 30 seconds. I would like to return to my provocation formulated in the form of an open question. Obviously, we need more empirical evidence to really understand what the language problem is in the multilingual university in different contexts, specifically. We should continue our work, problematizing hegemonic institutional assumptions about language. I think we are quite good at that. But I think we should go forward, actually, because sometimes I wonder if just publishing an article as we did is enough in order to change things in universities, which I know the answer, and the answer is clearly no. I think we could focus on, from a language policy perspective, on the problem definition, which is what we are doing at the moment, and especially in agenda setting for policy change. Here, I must say that I contacted a EDI unit in one university, actually because I wanted to interview them and ask them why they didn't consider language as a potential factor of discrimination. And in this case, they didn't even reply, so they weren't so much interested in having me there. And the same could apply to some institutional initiatives, such as the Athena Swan initiative, in which language is not a factor that they consider. I think change is more likely to happen by advocating at the local level. And this is what has happened in one of the universities in our study. So advocate is a way to go forward, I would say. And that's it. I'm going to finish with this, saying that the floor is yours for additional suggestions about what we can do and how. And this includes, of course, my discussants al console, because I cannot wait to listen to these comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iker. That's very interesting, and I'm sure we'll breed some discussion. So we're slightly delayed, but not by a lot. I think we should have a very quick comfort break and be back at 5 minutes past the hour. So that's only 3 minutes, so that we don't delay it further, if that's okay with you. I'll see you in 2 minutes now, apparently. We'll just have a very quick 2-minute comfort break, if that's okay. Now we go into the welcome back, everybody, and now we'll go into the discussion segment of the event, and then after that we will sort of segue into a general question and answer. So here our discussants Dylan, Lijian, and Sal will elaborate, talk about, perhaps even ask some questions regarding the 3 provocations that have been presented already. So without wasting time, Dylan, do you want to?
Yeah, thanks, Subrar. First of all, thank you, Professor Yang, Professor Banawi, and also Dr. Dothia for your very insightful provocations. Professor Yang, if I can start by commenting on some of the points that you raise in your provocation. You mention in your talk that the imposition of Western systems allows little space for East Asia's intellectual traditions, which resonates with epistemic injustices, in that the knowledge systems of Chinese students' learning experiences compromises the knowledge of their own social and also cultural traditions. You also mentioned that elite scholars struggle to achieve integration of the 2 knowledge systems because they're not well equipped to do so. At the same time, a successful outcome of the integration of the 2 knowledge systems is a bicultural intellectual identity, but that students themselves do not always realize the great value of their biculturality at the individual, institutional, or systemic levels. So my first question with regards to this is in a bilingual or multicultural learning environment, what can we do to help students realize the value of their bicultural intellectual identity?
Well, the question is, should I answer now? Yeah, well, the question is important, and understandably, people ask this kind of question, but it's actually not easy to answer. You know, I just feel as a comparative education researcher, we compare all the time, and in the East and in the West, usually we compare things, but we don't know all things. We only know one reasonably better. We actually have very little knowledge of the other, depending on which the other is. But I don't know whether I can answer your question very exactly what you want, but our students and our teachers, including myself, we don't have enough knowledge of our own society. Compared with the Western, the knowledge of the, sorry, I use the Western, sounds very, compared with the Western part, we actually know less about our own society. But my experience has been in my own classes, when I raise the issue, if I work hard, particularly on the Chinese part, and I can easily get very positive response from our students. They tend to agree with me, they tend to realize what they need to do. But what they need to do is scary, is just far, far too much. And particularly in the case of China, which is an old country with a rich history. You know, China is a huge book. It's very difficult to read. It's a thick book also, and it's difficult. But on one hand, on the other hand, the beautiful tradition is there. It's just like in the cloud. Anytime you want to use, you can use. But these days, very few people can use. And very much as I presented in my presentation, people have this captive mind already. Often they don't realize. Quickly, I just want to say, Hong Kong, those people I emphasize has biculturality just started, and their biculturality isn't far from perfect. Okay, this is something just emerging in this region, and I capture that. I think that's something we need to pay attention to, need to develop further. But very little theorization of this. Still, very little. Yeah. How to do that? I don't know how to answer very specifically. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your reply. I think your reply also maybe resonates with another point that you mention in your talk, where you say that the East Asian experience needs to be reconceptualized, and that modernization needs to have a different meaning. So the kind of awareness of what this different meaning actually involves, maybe it's still kind of developing at the moment. I would assume by the reply that you gave, but you also mentioned that traditional values need to be re-evaluated. So could you please elaborate on what re-evaluating traditional values involves, and what other non-Western societies can do to support the ideas that you raise?
Yeah, I think let's just cite China as an example. I think it's natural for Chinese people, and it's also politically correct to say, Chinese tradition is beautiful, and to say some nice words about Chinese tradition. But actually, even they are originally beautiful traditions, they may not be that beautiful against this kind of current background. And this current background is the West is already there. Nobody can take them away. And it's not wise enough to resist. You know, if I want to have a job, I have to have good English. Otherwise, I cannot find a job in Hong Kong, you know. So we have to do things based on the fact. Therefore, I borrow the Western philosopher's slogan, or, you know, words. We have to reevaluate our tradition against this new context. And according, together with this is we have to have good knowledge of both. Then we know which part is beautiful and how to carry forward. So it's, again, it's a huge job. But most urgent thing now at the moment, I think, is to rebuild the knowledge of tradition and wisdom, traditional wisdom, knowledge.
Thank you very much, Professor Yang. I'll hand over now to Li Jun. Li Jun, over to you.
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you.
So is Professor Barnawi still here? Sorry.
If he's
Yes, I'm here. I'm just on my way home, I guess.
Oh, okay. So
All right.
thank you. Thank you for a wonderful talk, which is very enlightening. And I've also read a lot about your publications, you know, focusing on the value of Muslim beliefs, especially to what extent a lot of valuable concepts in Muslim can be our contributing knowledge for enhancing intercultural understanding. So I guess my question is how to localize these Muslim ideologies, epistemologies, or knowledge in teacher education outside Islam. So especially among people who have very little knowledge about Muslimness or Quran. So let me give you an example about Hong Kong, which you may be a little bit familiar with, because I can resonate this a lot. I've been doing some research on transnationalism, local transnationalism in teacher education in Hong Kong. So there's a large number of ethnic minorities who are from Muslim countries in South Asia and who are learning Chinese in local schools in Hong Kong. Whereas in these schools, the teachers who are teaching Chinese had very little knowledge about, you know, the Muslim culture, the Islamic culture. So, and has been a great need for deep reflection on how to effectively incorporate or contextualize the Muslim ideologies or knowledge in the Chinese language curriculum. And this has been mentioned a lot, you know, in the literature, but I guess there is no, you know, effective actions have been done fast. So I wonder, from your perspective, especially how to help, you know, these teachers or teacher educators outside Islam to who are responsible in teaching, you know, children from Islamic countries or you know, Muslim children. For example, just as what I mentioned about the case in Hong Kong. Yeah, what do you think about this? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for this really insightful questions, first of all. And also my apologies once again, because I have to rush my presentations as it's a Friday here and I have to cut the Friday prayer at the mosque. Earlier when I mentioned that, yes, the dominant discourse talking a lot about transnationalization of higher education with and through English. But unfortunately, there is another form of transnationalization of higher education which has been taking place through Arabic medium of instruction. This is what I call it. And yet the dominant discourse still did not acknowledge that. Therefore, even we intend to engage with the phenomena of transnationalizations and localization, we tend to accept it and engage with it through the Western tradition of thought, using Western thinking tools and tradition in order to problematize, in order to understand these issues, right? Even in the case of China and Hong Kong and Africa, right, there is a large number of students, right, who have been engaged in different form of transnationalization. Like there's a lot of PhD, master and bachelor degree programs being offered, for example, in Saudi Arabia to transnational Muslim students, right? The same case in Egypt and Sudan and Morocco and other part of the world. While this is happening, Asian and African students are the consumer of these programs. They have been deeply engaged with such programs for ages, for decades, right? But yet their rich experiences have not been documented in the contemporary literature, right? This is one thing. The other thing is that when it's come to localizing the experiences, you see, for Islam, knowledge is something sacred, right? So Islam is not really interested in terms of creating dichotomy, between Western and non-Western knowledge, right? But as long as any forms of knowledge could serve, like the ideology, the value of Islam's and cultures and identity, knowledge, it's a sacred place, right? Maybe one way of doing this is that to localize it is just to engage with it through what I call it in one of my studies, through halaqah. Halaqah, which is a group of Muslims, it's gathered together as in a form of circles and engage in knowledge construction while this is happening. Like they disrupt, their sense of viewing teachers, as a form of authority that who shouldn't be questioned, etc., right? This is one way of localizing. Another way of localizing it that is just to bring, the Islamic conceptualizations of knowledge, right, or transnationalization, which Islam, as I mentioned earlier, Islam actually recognized 4 types of rihla or knowledge, right? For visitings, for traveling, and also to seek knowledge within these 4 areas that I've mentioned earlier. So these are one way of localizing. But when you say localizing, it has somehow, a negative connotation. You are trying to present the knowledge of others as something not appropriate yet. In Islam, knowledge is a sacred, be they any types of knowledge.
Thank you for that, Professor Barnawi. And there's more to touch on this, but we'll move on to the next points from Sal, if you want to move in, and then we'll bring all of this together after this. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to all our speakers, actually, Professor Yanrui, Professor Barnawi, and Professor Iker Erdocia. In fact, let me start because I'm responding to Iker. Muchas gracias por tus provocaciones. Thank you for your provocations. I'm going to start with a couple of points and then lead to 2 questions, okay? So first of all, just to say to everyone that it's really worth the read to grab a copy of Iker's paper in higher education. Obviously, I read it myself, and it was quite engaging and also eye-opening in some respects. And I like the fact that both in your provocation and in your paper, you say very clearly, this is not just an issue or phenomenon that you can talk about. This is a problem, that this is the answer. It's really a complex phenomenon. I like the fact that you mentioned that you draw on Bourdieu's work. Bourdieu's work has percolated education debates for a very long time. But I think we're finally moving a bit forward with these debates. I think we're going a bit beyond the notion of capital as something that you either have or you don't, and therefore it exclusively leads to inequality. I think Iker's work shows that there's more complexity to this. In a way, I like the idea that all talks today have drawn so clearly on the importance of our own heritage. So whoever we are, wherever we come from, socio-politically, socio-geographically, all of that, we have a heritage that we need to put forward. And that heritage brings, informs, enriches whatever we do. So here, obviously, we're talking about practices of teaching and learning and research in higher education. So it's quite interesting to see that the concept of English in Ireland, which is officially a bilingual country with a multicultural heritage, still shows that English dominates. I obviously feel a little uncomfortable saying that because of my own heritage. But I also think that, you know, again, we need to be welcoming. We need to be more open to the complexities of the issues here. So, for example, I like that in your paper you talk about the importance of thinking of EDI. You know, so language is clearly an uncomfortable phenomenon at the university, but is this actually transparently and organically talked about in EDI debates? And if so, is it done through lip service, box ticking exercises, which unfortunately I see a lot happening in higher education institutions these days everywhere in the world? So that's one of my first questions or points. The other one is, it refers to the, we call it in the UK, the Research Excellence Framework. In Hong Kong is the SRHE, you know, and in different parts of the world, institutions have their own systems to assess funding performance-based research. Now, in the UK, I know there's a strong drive for assessing research through English. I know colleagues who could write in languages other than English. Some do, some don't. And the question is there a way at universities like in Ireland or even the UK with the so well-established REF system to actually assess the quality, the rigor, the soundness of research if this research is published in a language that isn't English? So that's my 2 points for you. Thanks again, Ike, for your presentation and for your paper.
Thanks a lot, Sal, yeah, for your comments and the good 2 questions as well. In terms of the first one, the EDI committees, actually it's difficult to know what's going on there. And actually, as I said, I tried to access one of those committees and actually they didn't reply, so they weren't so much interested in my query, I would say. And I can suspect that language is not an issue for them. And again, I think they draw so much, at least in the Irish context, as in the UK context, I think, in the Athena, Swan, you know, frame. And because language is not included there, actually, well, this is something that, well, ideally, yeah, we should consider it, but actually it's not a priority at the moment. So that's why my point as well, that we have to bring the language issue as well to the agenda setting of universities, try to advocate as well. And there is something to be done, because I know that in UCD, University College Dublin, actually they were successful in making, you know, the senior management board or the committee or whatever to include, you know, a recognition of linguistic diversity of both students and staff. Yeah, we could argue that perhaps this is something based on discourse and nothing else. Of course, we can criticize that and problematize that, but at least it's something that they were able to do through, you know, lobby, because they were lobbying in order to get that. So I think that addresses your first question, I think. And in reference to the second question, I know that some colleagues publish in languages other than English, but the problem with that is not just the university. Well, you know, yeah, we don't have REF actually, but we have like internal ways of assessing our performance as well. And for that, yeah, what the university wants is, first of all, articles in journals based on, you know, Q1, obviously. And in order to get such an article in a language other than English, that's quite difficult. So because there aren't many incentives, you know, from the university side for multilingual staff members actually to publish in other languages. So these colleagues do that sometimes, but very rarely actually, because they get nothing from that. Or, well, they get something, of course, no, they get a lot. But what I mean is, from the institutional perspective, they don't get as much as they should actually. So yeah, that's a shame. That will change, unfortunately, unless if we continue with this way of assessing our performance. Yeah.
I kind of suspected that these would be the answers you would give me, unfortunately. But perhaps we can, thank you so much for this, Ike. Perhaps we can now move on to the questions from the audience. There's quite a few in the chat.
Yeah, I just wanted to say before we move on to those questions, there's some really important commonalities across these three papers, but they are undercurrents, and I want to try and unpack them. And this is one of the problems, one of the challenges with interdisciplinary conversations. You either end up talking past one another, or you don't get to the root. I mean, Professor Yang talked about bi and multiculturality amongst academics. To what extent is bi and multilingualism a vehicle for bi and multiculturality? And there's religion and culture as a vehicle for HE, in as much as language is a vehicle for HE. And I want to get to those connections. And the work of Farid Al-Attas in Singapore is relevant here, though he's not a linguist, on the sacralization of knowledge. And it speaks to Jenny's Li Jian's point about the Muslim minority students in Hong Kong. The sacralization of knowledge applies to things like Buddhist economics, for example, and not just Muslim issues across the world. It's something to take note of. And then there's historicity, which linguists often ignore. Forgive me, fellow linguists, but I've yet to see one of my linguist colleagues talk about Arabic as an academic lingua franca in the medieval period, before the Western academia was even a thing. And Persian, Chinese, Indonesian, and Spanish scholars would write in Arabic as an academic lingua franca. And George Makdisi, in his book, The Rise of Colleges, Professor Young, if you haven't got it, I'll send you a PDF. And Montgomery Watt writes about this as well, how the organizational system of the Western university is a decidedly European thing, but in terms of content, ceremony, and protocol, it came entirely from the Islamic world. And so if we are to appropriate from the Western world, well, appropriation already occurred. Let's see how that occurred, and let's see how different appropriations for the next generation can occur whilst maintaining the cultural integrity of appropriators, if you know what I mean. So, we can, perhaps these are points we can further unpack in the next half an hour if we can. So if you have any questions, I thought the one directed at Professor Yang was one of the first.
Yes, I think we got
from Tanisha Ellis.
Ellis, yeah. So I'm just going to read it out for you, Professor Yang. So Tanisha says, wonderful presentation, thank you for that. Would love to hear more about this topic and how East Asia has tried to counter Western dominance in its cultures within education.
Again, very important question. Not easy to answer in a very specific way. I think the good thing is becoming increasingly positive. More and more people realize there is a need to encounter this. But I have to say, still not enough. And in terms of how to do this, they often go to extremes, either this or that. I personally feel that's not constructive enough, or that's not good enough. You have to develop good knowledge of both, and that's very, very difficult. And in my own institution, sorry, I'm a dean here, so I may criticize my own institution, which is University of Hong Kong is a prestigious university here. For a long, long time, it was the only university in this society. But even today, as we speak now, I'm only asked to be a Westerner. I'm not asked to be a Chinese. And to some extent, I'm not allowed to be a Chinese. So let me explain. What do you teach? What I teach here, and how I teach, and in what language we teach, and how I do research, what research question I have, where to publish, in what language to publish. And even now I'm the dean, all administrative meetings conducted in English, according to the procedure, which is based on very much the British. I'm not entirely criticizing this. We need to do things built on this. But you know how difficult it is to achieve this. Even as we speak, our university, which is quite well known, but still doing this. Therefore, it is very difficult for you to really to do something to counter. You know, that's very difficult. But good thing is, I said, more and more people realize, even very few people know how to do that. We need to do in every, you know, every part of our life and work. But first, the awareness. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So the next question I've got here is, I think it's Professor Barnawi. So in intra-African contexts as well, students enroll in French medium instructions program, especially in North African context. Oh, that's actually more of a comment. Sorry, it's not a question, actually. Following, we got Sarah Hopkins saying, fascinating talk, Professor Barnawi. I'm interested in reading more about Islam language transnationalism. Very important points made on the need to disrupt Anglosphere dominance of knowledge production and analysis of global issues. I'm wondering if Professor Barnawi would like to say something about these comments. Have we lost connection, perhaps?
He might come back in. Yeah.
Okay.
We can move on to the next one. I think there's another one by Joanne there.
Joanne, yes. So Joanne says, I'm shocked, but sadly not surprised by this provocation, Iker. I think there is a lack of recognition of the power of language on intersectional members of faculty. I have heard and tackled such discrimination and attitudes. I'm shocked that language expression is not even filtered. This was really informative. Thank you. That's more of a comment. Thank you, Iker. Thank you, Joanne. Next, James says, agree with both Iker and Joanne. I wonder what change looks like, though. I think we kind of touched upon that. Is there anything else you'd like to add, perhaps, Iker?
Not really, yeah, because I don't have an answer. Yeah, so just some general points, right? Just something for all of us to discuss, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then we got another comment for Professor Young. So the question says, you mentioned before the Japanese is quite success in integrating the old and the new ones since they are not integrating them. Can you explain more about this? I'm wondering if the question here is more about what can we learn from the Japanese case.
Japan, when I was a young student, we in comparative education class, we learned Japan was a typical good example to manage a good management of the tradition and modernity. As I grew older and I realized that's not true actually, but Japan really developed fast, and as a result of learning the West, learning from the West, and Japan established the first modern university in East Asia to learn from the West. But if you look at how Japan responded at the very beginning to Westerners' invasion, particularly the Netherlands. So in Japan, people call Western knowledge called Lan. Lan means Holland, and Lan should be called Hol. The Dutch was the first arrived in Japan, and at that time they were very worried and panicked, but they learned quickly. So superficially, in terms of industrialization, they really achieved highly. They quickly became a powerful country, and then invaded China and succeeded. You know, they defeated China, and that's a major event in East Asian history. But today we look at Japan's experience. I'm not saying entirely failure, but Japan never integrated them. Japan keep Japanese population. Japanese people are extraordinary people, and they are extraordinary. Very few people can do that, and they keep both very strongly. They have their own tradition at the individual level and at a systemic level. And they have the traditional, they have the Western, but very little integration, both quite successfully. However, because without those integration, therefore, the system and the individuals at the bottom of their heart, I think they feel the pain all the time rather than comfortable. That's my criticism. That's my brief explanation of Japanese experience.
Thank you. We actually have another question for you, coming from Valerie Anderson. So building upon your recent comment, actually, what do you think that Western academics and Western university leaders could learn from universities in East Asia to address these issues that we're talking about? What do you think that practically they could do to address these issues?
That's I can answer this very diplomatically, but let me try to answer this very in a scholarly way. You know, it's common for non-Western societies to learn the West, because the modern, to a great extent, is the West. Therefore, they do have quite a good knowledge of the so-called West. But for the West, they do really have very little understanding of the rest. That's true. That's the fact. I don't want to, keep talking that part. But it really, sadly, a surprise for me to see how slow the Western world realize other values and try really sit down and respect and do this, because they have been in a comfortable position, understandably, but that's not good enough. We have to act because we are living in a small community, getting smaller and smaller. So we need to understand each other. In our comparative education, for example, people are still consciously or unconsciously looking for differences. And we have to realize we actually have differences. And based on that difference, but we need to know, to understand what do we share. What do we share is very, very important. And based on that sharing, and we can manage the differences. So far, the differences have been poorly managed. And indeed, the English word, I'm sorry, English word discrimination literally means differences. So I think understanding, knowledge is first priority. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Just if I could just jump in very quickly there. I mean, some of the big philosophers in the Western tradition, John Locke, John Stuart Mill, etc., of the Western liberal tradition, they studied Arabic and Hebrew and drew from philosophies across those different areas of thought. I seldom meet an academic in philosophy who speaks and engages deeply in a philosophy in another language these days. And I make a point of asking them when I meet them, but I always meet somebody from Arabia or China who engages in philosophy and thought in both, in more than one epistemic tradition. And that tells you everything, that how language is connected to by multiculturality, how it's the vehicle to facilitate it, and to create a better quality scholar at the end of it, quite frankly.
Yeah, I think coming from the field of language education research, I can sympathize and relate to what you just said, because I've been studying Chinese students for quite some years now, and I've dealt with a number of criticisms from the community. One of them was, oh, you're not Chinese yourself, so you shouldn't be studying Chinese students, which I felt was very racist and uncomfortable. But I still publish about Chinese students because it's one of my interests. But I do wonder, when we talk about criticality, for example, when we talk about criticality in teaching and learning in higher education, why do we exclusively or seemingly exclusively think of John Dewey, whose work is fantastic? Okay, it's great work. We talk about the notion of experience, which I do as well. Like I do that, so I'm kind of putting myself in that same crowd. But why don't we think about, for example, Confucius? Why don't we think about the Japanese traditions in understanding, I don't know, ikigai and how that guides life and decisions? This sort of questions. Why don't we go beyond the literature that has been proffered for the past 50, 60 years and so forth? I think that's a question really to, even for us, to say, why are we practically doing this with our own thinking and writing? So anyway, that's a criticism to myself as well. So moving on with the other comments we've got in the chat. Let me see. I hope I'm not missing out anyone. Okay, so There's another comment from Valerie, actually. One of the undercurrents I have noticed in these presentations and discussion is the unacknowledged issues of epistemic coloniality in relation to what is seen as what counts as valid knowledge. I think that's what I just said in a way. My concern is that the institutional norms of the West are reinforcing these epistemic limitations. Yeah, I think we all agree. Is there would Iker or Professor Barnowi like to add anything to these last few comments? One thing, I don't know if Ibra want to jump in with this, but one thing that comes to mind as well as I'm reading these comments and as we are engaging in these debates, again, coming from a field of applied linguistics and education, me and my colleagues often say, we no longer use the terms West and East in our writing. Okay, we don't use those terms because it's, we moved on, we're contemporary, but the truth is probably that although we might not use those terms, the epistemic values remain. The fact that some contexts, some individuals have some privileges, that some contexts and some individuals have less visibility, that remains a fact, I think, even if we are trying to make some steps forward with the terminology, which I think it's something, we want to acknowledge that at least the effort is happening. This event today, I think, is an effort towards, I think, the right direction. So there is some good to acknowledge there as well, I hope. Ibrahim, would you like to add?
But these terms change with time. For example, when the first Ming Emperor, Hongwu Emperor, talked about teachings from the West, he was talking about Islam. So the terms West and East, they change. And the West really means Europe and the Anglosphere. That's what it really means. And I think most of the world agrees on that anyway. But I think this discussion has shown that language issues are intrinsically connected to decoloniality. And the tension is, do we switch languages and go with the local language and subsequently decolonize? Do you really decolonize when you do that? Or do you use the dominant language and appropriate it and try to create channels and mechanisms for your local culture to be revitalized through that other language? And these are the difficulties we face. I think there's a lot of work on decoloniality. Maybe it's a bit of a bandwagon as well. There's also some work that has come down into applied linguistics on decoloniality. And I think that just switching languages is not a radically decolonial thing to do. Because it is the epitome of colonization when you use a local language to express colonial thought. That's the epitome of colonization. So when people say, oh, we're doing this in X, Y, and Z language, we are radically decolonial, I say no. You could be the complete opposite of that. So the way this connects, these three talks connect, is in my mind, having heard them now, is that you've got the bicultural academics who are subsequently bi and multicultural academics who are subsequently bi and multilingual. But it doesn't stop there, right? Because I have a friend who's a philosopher and she's bi and multilingual, but all her philosophy is in English, and she goes to Turkey on holiday and it's just, superficial Turkish. So that's not the kind of bi and multilingual we're talking about. But so then you're moving on to Professor Barnowi's talk, which is about you've got to draw from those, you've got to be transnational, both in actuality and also in epistemology. So the rehla, which is the movement, the sojourn of the learner. So you've got to be a sojourning learner, not just in one's own sort of geographical context. You could pretty much get the same experience as a university here and a university in Hong Kong in many respects. But one has to be a sojourner in terms of culture and knowledge to be truly developmental. And every great philosophical teaching has the sojourn as part of it. Traveling out and to meet new teachers who may not agree with you or who will give you a different way of looking at things. It's almost a fundamental part of traditional wisdom, is to engage in some kind of sojourn physically and epistemologically. in your own way of understanding the world. And then you have the micro things that happen at the everyday level that Ika talked about. How bi-multiculturality is played out in the office, in the interactions between staff, and how it's actually not that easy to be a proper bi-multicultural academic when people have these language ideologies and how they like the way Ika showed in his data. And so I think that's a sort of a connection between all of these three that I think is very, we've gone from big to slightly more meso level and to micro level. I think that we didn't intend to plan it like that, but it's actually come out like that. And yeah, happy to get any more thoughts from the speakers on this and how they think they'll be taking this forward, if at all.
I wonder if Li Jian and Dylan had any thoughts to add to this.
Yeah, it just, I mean, what you have discussed just reminds me about, you know, the very basic framework of intercultural competence. You know, underneath the pyramid of intercultural competence, the prerequisites must be knowledge and attitude. So you can't build up true dialogue between, you know, cross cultures or real intercultural competence without these two. So I think when we discuss what Western universities could learn from the East or, you know, in the similar circumstances, I think more knowledge and also attitude are the prerequisite. And only based on these, only based on sufficient knowledge of each other and also an intercultural mindset, that we can really work out efficient, effective, you know, institutional policies, you know, to improve the situation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Li Jian.
Thank you. I don't know if we got, did we read out the question from Federica?
Oh, I think Federica might wanted to, I don't know if we are allowed to unmute the microphone. She might want to share something, actually.
Yes, sure she can.
Oh,
hello.
great.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, I typed because I wasn't sure about the moderation rules. But basically, when I was listening, especially to Iker, I remember episodes about microaggressions, even as a staff member, even comments where people think they are going to be, you know, nice and a joke about your culture, joke about your accent, which is not always, I mean, someday I don't like it, you know my point. But then I realized when I started being a lecturer with only basically international students, the moment they open up, they told me all those ideas and experiences that they were having with what is this British English then? Because if you are an international teacher and we are all international students, we're speaking English because it's the language and you're studying in UK, so that's the requirement. But then they start questioning, what is the real English then? Because everybody has an accent, possibly someone is using American English because they watch Netflix. So what is the authentic one? And then they start saying, but your English is more accessible to me because you say all the vowels or you say all the consonants. So it sounds more like the English that I could understand, although it is not British English. So they start saying, when I have a British teacher, I know that's the real English, even like very posh kind of accent. And they said, but we don't get it. So I'm not sure if I get English for what English is supposed to be. And then you have a lot other students who are from a different kind of mindset and legacy with colonial past, where they say, I'm not happy that you have an accent because I paid £20,000 for a British teacher. And then I usually, obviously, I'm not happy about it. But then I usually try and say, if you want to go to an international university, you get international on any side, which means that your teachers might not have a PhD, and I have. So try and consider the quality of the teaching, not my accent. So I think that there is this idea, like we were talking about colonialization, decolonizing. There are some cultures who are eager for being kept in the coloniality mindset. And I don't think it's obviously something that they are aware, but it's also the reason why they try and pursue an education in some universities. Where instead, when I was asked by, I think I've been a participant in a research, and they asked me, so you are an international staff, why did you choose Coventry University? And I didn't have that kind of, oh, I really want to be in UK. I just told them, I know the language, you teach the subject, and it's still Europe. So I told them that my reason were strategic. I never thought of the prestige. I just wanted a place where I could find a job, which is so different from students. And I think this is the different approach to language as well, and the culture. So sorry for this long comment. I just wanted to share the perspectives.
That's a fantastic testimonial. Thank you so much, Federica. Actually, I really like the fact that you mentioned the students' perspective there, because I think whether it's the UK, whether it's other parts of the world, we know that students these days see higher education as a service that they pay for, and they have expectations. And I think it's the one highlight that I'd like to take away from your testimonial is, if you come to an international university with an international experience, then you get international on all sides. I think that's a really nice phrase to take away from your experience. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so we're nearing the end of the event. So I wonder if anyone would like to add anything before we say our thanks.
Sally, I just wanted to add one point, if that's okay, to what Federica mentioned. I just wanted to say that an international university, it's by its very definition, is a multilingual environment. So therefore, it's not necessarily a matter of being exposed to, as you said, like British English, for example, in the teaching. I think it's a case really of the instructors catering to the different levels of agency that students bring from the various environments that they're from, because that agency is basically a product of the context that they're from. So it's not necessarily a matter of the language achieving that. It's a case of catering to the agency, which again are a product of the knowledge systems that they've brought from their home contexts.
Ibrar, I think you want to say something.
Yeah, having said all of this, we've conducted this entire international event in one language. Academic English, lingual. None of you, Professor Yang, used some Chinese as an event, and there are benefits to having a lingua franca. I mean, the exchange of knowledge. I mean, think about the vaccine for COVID and how scientists were able to share things very quickly from one country to the next. Had we not had an academic lingua franca, would we have had a vaccine so quickly? And there's many other examples I could quote. So having said all of this, right, there are clear examples when you operate with a language that's just happened to become a dominant lingua franca, albeit through colonial enterprise in the past. And so this is always going to be a debate. This is always going to carry on, and it's never going to stop. I don't think debates, most of them in English, probably for the foreseeable future. So how we make this multilingual university, it is already multilingual, but how we have the debates around power and language ideology, and those discussions by the water cooler, as we sometimes say, between staff about which academics' languages valorize more than the other, and subsequently thereby in multilingual and culturality. I don't know if it has an actual answer. I don't think it has a resolution. I think as individual scholars, we can engage in multiple systems of languages and knowledges, and then create knowledge in a fairer, in a way that's more multilingual and international. But I think there'll always be, the dominant languages that we need to have these kinds of conversations, through which we should have these kinds of conversations. I don't think that's going to go away, but you know, that's it really. Just wanted to make a point on that.
No, I think that's a very practical, pragmatic point, but I do also think there is potential for pushing the boundaries. And I think if we remind ourselves to think that language isn't just a system for communication, but it's actually a cultural channel of heritage. And today I feel like everyone has mentioned that to progress, we need to draw on a variety of heritage traditions. I think that's probably one thing I'd like to take away from today, is that if we remind ourselves, our students, and start to inform our practices that heritage is at the heart of what we're doing, that we can expand and broaden our visions. I think today, I feel it's actually what we've done today. Like, we've been all talking from our own perspectives, asking, calling for more welcoming practices. So I think we got something to be pleased with, even in the face of the many challenges and obstacles outside. I see there are a few more comments, but I think, let's see, Patrick says, I think it's not just the language issue, there are also sociocultural issues, cultural differences and cultural perceptions. This is a very complex issue, and intercultural communication is still an unfamiliar concept among teachers and students. We live in very different worlds where our sense of realities are different. Yes, Patrick, I feel like I stole your thunder there, actually, as I was concluding with my thoughts there. So perhaps before we conclude, major thanks to our invited speakers. Ibra, would you like to close?
Thank you so much. It was a really good comment by Sarah there. Sarah, if you want to write a blog post for the SRHE blog on this event, because you've encapsulated it very nicely in your comment there.
Oh, I missed that.
So,
sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
It's all right. It's okay. People can read it. So thank you so much, everybody, for attending, for coming, and for our speakers, for Professor Yang Rui and Ikara Dochia and Othman Barnawi. Thank you so much for taking the time out and for our discussants. And please stay tuned for our Multilingual University Network. I think we'll get the go-ahead. You've been a great audience, and we've had a lot of people sign up. So SRHE is very supportive. Please pay attention to our international annual conference, and take care, everybody, and God bless.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Bye-bye.